Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Newsam's Night TV studio and another edition of Inside Media. I'm your host, John Maynard. And on this Veterans Day weekend, we are appropriately joined by a man who covers all things military. Christopher Lawrence is CNN's Pentagon correspondent, who's been with the network since 2004. Prior to taking the Pentagon beat, Chris worked as a correspondent for CNN based out of the network's Los Angeles and Chicago bureaus. He has traveled around the world in such hot spots as the Middle East and Haiti. He also reported from New Orleans in the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina, and he's traveled to Iraq, where he was embedded with U.S. troops fighting the insurgency in the Sunni Triangle. Before joining CNN, Lawrence was a correspondent for CBS NewsPath, where he also covered the Iraq War. Prior to joining CBS, Lawrence served as an investigative reporter and weekend morning anchor for WXYZ TV in Detroit, and he's also had stints in Syracuse, New York, and Tuscaloosa, Alabama. And most important on this Veterans Day weekend, I must note that Chris is a veteran of the US Naval Reserve. So ladies and gentlemen, Christopher Lawrence. Chris, let's talk about your role at CNN. Walk us through a typical day, if that exists, covering the Pentagon.
The one thing that's a little bit different about, I guess, Washington, D.C. and the beats here are that we don't all go to the CNN office. So our folks who cover the White House actually go to the White House every day. Our folks who go to Capitol Hill go to Capitol Hill. We go to the Pentagon, and there's a media area inside the Pentagon where we work every day. We're sort of all lined up in these tiny little offices about as big as one of these squares. Okay. But it's NBC, we're right next to Fox, ABC, and we're just sort of all in a row.
Right. So tell us about a typical day. What happens for reporting?
Come in the morning, and they have what's called a gaggle, which is where all the press will come into the public affairs officer's office, and it's a very informal morning meeting where we just throw questions out. Sometimes they're answered, sometimes they're not, but it at least gets the day rolling. After that, we sort of branch off. I mean, there are some days, like when the war when the assault on Libya started, when Osama bin Laden was killed, things like that, where you know all day, all week, it's going to be one story. Other times like this, when there's no one major thing going on, could be working on a story about health care for veterans, could be working on a story about North Korea. It just depends what we've kind of got in the hopper.
You work in the biggest office building in the world. You ever get lost in there, or how do you get around?
As long as you know where to find Starbucks, you are okay.
That's good. Okay.
The thing that surprised me the most was, you know, coming from the military, and you know, health and fitness is such a big criteria in the military. But every single restaurant almost in the Pentagon is Popeyes, Panda Express, McDonald's, Taco Bell, Dunkin' Donuts. Yeah. There's not a lot of healthy eating options in there.
Right. Yeah. Well, you mentioned you are a veteran. How did your time in the U.S. Naval Reserve help shape your coverage today, or does it?
I think it gave me an appreciation and a knowledge of military structure and military life, to understand that the chain of command is a very important thing in the military in a way that it's not in the civilian world. To understand what base housing allowance is, to understand some of the differences in which military families live as opposed to maybe civilian counterparts. There was a story I did, it was my first year at the Pentagon, where it was about the Navy downsizing. And it was, you know, the Navy needed to get smaller, so there were going to be cuts. It was going to be harder to stay in, basically, in the enlisted ranks. And I went to the chief of naval, it's called CHINFO, but it's the information hub for the Navy. Okay. And, you know, the guy was pretty honest. He said, you know, I'm not going to help you get somebody, this isn't exactly a great story for us, so I'm not going to help you get this. So I'm like, okay. So we just drove down to Norfolk and we hung out at the Navy Exchange in the parking lot and just spent the entire day just talking to people as they came in and out. And we had a really good cross section. We sort of focused on these two people, and one was a chief who was very happy about it. You know, he said this is going to clear out a lot of the dead weight. You know, this is going to make go-getters like me. It's going to give us opportunities to advance. And we also spoke with a young woman who was like an E3, and she was really distraught about it. She had a young child. You know, she had to take some time down because of her pregnancy, and she felt she was being forced out. And I remember when the story aired, one of the admiral can't even remember his name at the time, but one of the officers there, you know, called me up and said, "This is the worst piece of journalism I've ever seen in 20 years, and blah, blah, blah. You know, you said this, and Navy's firing people." And I said, look, okay, here are the facts, here are the numbers, here are the rates. You know, you tell me if it's wrong. If it's wrong, I'll back off. But you got to tell me exactly, not that you just don't like it, but you got to tell me where it's wrong. And he said, well, you just stood out in the parking lot and got some E3. You know, and I could sort of understand where for his level, being an admiral doesn't interact with a lot of E3, and E3 being, you know, one of the lower enlisted ranks. But I was an E3. You know, I was 18 years old. So I wasn't, you know, I was a smallest of the small fry. And so my perspective was more, well, what makes her opinion as an E3 any less relevant than an admiral or a chief or someone who had a much higher rank? So I think in some ways my experience sort of
had an interesting perspective, sure. As I noted when I introduced you, you were embedded with US troops fighting in Iraq, and somewhat of a broad question here, but what is your opinion of the Embed program? Obviously, this was something introduced by the Bush administration, and you know, some media observers worried that the close proximity to the troops could taint the objectivity of the journalists. What do you think?
I do think that's true to a certain extent. I know, you know, to be honest, it's probably shaped mine. You know, whether consciously or unconsciously. I mean, some of the embeds can be a month long. You know, when you sleep with people and eat with people and walk on these patrols with people day after day after day, I mean, after a few days, you know, walls start to come down and you really become a lot more comfortable and you talk a lot more. You can't help but sympathize somewhat. So in that respect, I think it's been a great thing for the military because I think it's humanized the war and given journalists direct access to some of the troops who are fighting it. There are some constraints that we've talked about within CNN. You don't always have an option to break off from the embed to get some of the opinions you might need from the Iraqis, from the Afghans. But that's also colored by the fact, I mean, during the height of the Iraq War and in certain parts of Afghanistan, I mean, when I was down in Helmand and Kandahar province, some of these are not areas where you can travel unilaterally without, you know, extreme risk. So you have to balance the desire to go out and interview certain people with, is this an area we can really go without an extreme amount of protection? But I know at CNN, you know, when we're in Iraq, when we're in Afghanistan, in our home base in Kabul and Baghdad, I mean, we live in a house. So we spend some of the time with the troops, but a lot of our time is spent outside the embed process as well, living in a regular neighborhood, you know, going about our day, talking to Iraqis and Afghans as well.
Let's stay on Iraq. President Obama, of course, announced last month that nearly all the troops will leave at the end of the year. Without getting into the opinion game with you, what do you think the United States has accomplished there?
Honestly, I don't know if we'll know. I don't know, when journalists start making proclamations about what's happened and what's not happened and sort of, writing the end on something, I tend to think that's better left for historians because, I look back and the history I've read, obviously before my time, but, World War II, Vietnam, if you made a judgment, on the day that helicopter was flying out of Saigon, you might look at one way. If you look at today and you look at direct flights from Chicago to Ho Chi Minh City and tours and like that, you have a completely different perspective. I will say, I remember the really, really bad days of Iraq where, you were just dealing with how many people were going to get killed today. It wasn't a matter of if, it was a number. Where would that bomb explode? Who would die today? How many would die? And then when I was there about a year ago, we actually drove from our embed. And we have armed security with us, but to drive from Baghdad to this little base along the Iranian border, with nothing but Iraqi military checkpoints, we didn't see a U.S. military vehicle the entire way. And to me, even a few years ago, that would have been unthinkable.
Right.
So
let's go to Afghanistan, and the topic of Afghanistan came up in last night's GOP debate. John Huntsman said it's time for our troops to come home. Tell us, what is the timetable at this point for troop withdrawal, and is there any indication that this could move either way?
There's always a chance. It's hard to predict, what the relationship between the U.S. and Afghan government will be in a year, much less in 2014 when, the president has sort of set that deadline
2014, right.
For the troops to come back. So much can change. Right. I will say, this is just my opinion, just from my perspective, the difference with Iraq and Afghanistan was like in Iraq, if you went in and you changed one area, it had sort of cascading effects to the towns and villages around it. So if you changed one area, you could affect a larger area. In Afghanistan, you could change one area and a mile down the road, they have no idea what's happened there. Not the last time I was there, but the time before, I was with I think it was the 82nd Airborne. It was in Kandahar province, but in the really remote areas. And the Army, they had a translator working with them. And so the translator's talking to the Afghan in this village, and the translator starts laughing. And so the young captain is like, asked the translator, what's so funny? He's like, no, sir, no big deal. He's like, no, what's so funny? He's like, no, it doesn't matter. He's like, I forget the translator's name. He's like, come on, what's so funny? What did he say? What's going on? And the translator said he didn't know the Soviets were still here. And it's hilarious to us. Yeah. But that shows, some of the grand plans are here. At some of these villages, you've got to let them know these aren't Russians. Right. It was really after we cracked up and laughed, but when you thought about it, it was like, wow.
Right. Another hot topic, even just today in the news, is Iran. And there is a new report out that they are indeed developing nuclear weapons. And again, that was brought up in the GOP debate last night. But what are the odds at this point of U.S. military action? I know the Defense Secretary has said it's not an option at this point. But what are you hearing?
One of the things is I always say is when people say, well, what is a military thing? And I'm like, you can't even get consensus in the Pentagon, much less the military as a whole outside the Pentagon. I mean, I think that's one of the real fallacies, that the military thinks of one mind and everyone feels exactly the same about this issue or that issue. I've been in a room where, for like Wolf Show, where in the middle of a big story, where one general will literally say, I don't even want to be in the same room as long as that guy, this other general, is in there. There's that much like dislike and animosity between them. So, it depends who you talk to. I've talked to some people who say, absent a military action, missile strikes to take out some of their development sites, you're never going to stop them. I've had other people who say, you'll never hit them all. All you'll do is delay it a few years, and you'll cause a massive chain reaction of events in the Middle East that, will cause us to be putting out fires all over the place. So who's right? I don't know.
Okay. And then we do want to hear from you, so if anyone does have a question, please just raise your hand. And again, we have two staffers here who will, and it looks like we have a question up in the middle, top middle there. If one of you can get that. While they're going to come up, let me ask you, Chris, while the mic's coming to him. I mentioned the GOP debate twice already, and we're here in Washington going into an election year. And any desires to leave the Pentagon beat and cover politics like so many of your colleagues do at CNN?
I guess eventually, I think if you stay in Washington long enough, you want to get in that mix. Yeah. The Pentagon's a nice place, though, because you do touch on House Armed Services Committee, sometimes even Senate Foreign Relations Committee. So you do get a mix of politics. I mean, there's not many decisions that get made in the Pentagon that don't have political considerations, whether it's a congressman fighting to get that jet engine built in his district, or somebody else who's campaigned on cutting waste and wants to slash the budget. So even though we don't cover politics directly in campaigns, we get to touch the issues a little bit.
Excellent. Okay, sir, yes.
First off, thank you very much for that very honest answer about the Embed program. I want to take that a step further if I could. 92, the media covered the first Gulf War pretty much from the inside of hotel rooms in Riyadh or from Baghdad. Then the Embed program came, and we in journalism got very nervous about what this would mean, how we deal with it. If you had Leon Panetta at a White House Correspondent's dinner sitting across the table from you, and he said, how can we improve the program so that the media can do a good job and not feel that they're, as you say, stuck with the embed so they can go out to the field safely? What suggestions would you make? How would you change the existing program?
I think two things. I think as far as us getting out, I'm of the opinion that that risk and that cost should be at our expense. So if you want to break a crew out of an embed and get them into an area, I think it's incumbent on, in my case, CNN, or it could be BBC or Fox, to pay to have their, our own private security come down, get us from the embed point, take us to where we need to go and get us back. I wouldn't expect the military to provide an escort, to a different area or veer off from whatever mission they're doing. I think it really comes down to do the commanders embrace the embed process? Because I've had some embeds where if the colonel had a bad experience or just is not on board, that trickles down, and there's sort of this blanket put over the process. People don't want to talk to you. They feel very afraid. They feel very hesitant to say anything. I've had others where the colonels literally walked us into the room and said, you can talk to anybody you see anytime you want. They can say anything they want. It's hands off. So I think it's more from the highest levels at the Pentagon to get down to those unit commanders and those colonels who really control the tempo and the vibe, so to speak, of the units that are out there in the field. Because we love getting out on the embeds because at the Pentagon, you get the big strategic level. You know, you get the grand strategy, but you don't get the guy who's actually has to kick down that door, who has to sit in those shuras with the elder and figure out, you know, well, we just spent 3-4 months developing this relationship with this elder. It turns out he doesn't have any power. Nobody listens to him. That's the guy we need to talk to, but he's very tied into the, you know, insurgents. So how do we reach him? And I think once you get down to that unit level, where a lot of times on some of these remote bases, a lieutenant or a captain is the highest ranking person on the entire base. I mean, it's a young guy. You know, the message that they have from their superior, from that major, from that colonel, really influences whether you have an incredible embed where the people are very open and very free and talking very honestly, and one where people are just feeding you a company line throughout the whole process.
Thanks for the question. Right up there? Yeah.
I have two questions from different perspectives. Could you talk about the impact of Al Jazeera on reporting? Their noteworthiness came when the Bush administration was so opposed to some of their local reporting in Iraq, and now it appears the U.S. government is actively using Al Jazeera as a way to communicate its points of view, particularly in the Arab world, how that's changed journalism. The second is at the opposite extreme, WikiLeaks. You supposedly have a high security clearance and so on. And what is your self-control over getting information that's obviously important but deemed to be confidential? Virtually everything in the Pentagon is labeled at a minimum confidential. So two different questions.
I'll take the second one first. A lot of that is not so much in terms of the confidentiality of certain information. A lot of it isn't a blanket sort of aspect to it, but a very case-by-case basis. In other words, just about every source we talk to in the Pentagon will either be on the record, in which case it's a name and a face who's saying, you can quote me, you can put me on camera, this is what I'm saying. On background, which means they'll give you the information, but they want to be known as a US official or a senior defense official. They don't want to be named. And then off the record, in which you're given access to information, but you can't report it. And by my definition, if I'm given something off the record, even to take that information to somebody else is really blurring the lines. It's not a pure violation, but it's not in the spirit of it. Off the record, it is really telling you something to better give you context, to inform your reporting a little bit. But I take it as, if I want to report that, I've got to get a completely separate source, independent of this source that just told me that. And, you know, to release information that you're not supposed to release, break embargo. A lot of times we're given something but told, you know, this isn't reportable for 12 hours. You know, you really can do damage by, you know, breaking those rules. But at the same time, you know, the Pentagon leaks. And I think that goes back to just the different agendas within the military. You know, what one person doesn't want out, another person does. You know, the Joint Staff or the Office of the Secretary of Defense may have one opinion of this information, but the Army may feel, well, we don't want that program cut. So the Army will start talking to us and leaking certain things. This is what they're going to do. So, you know, I think sometimes, you know, you always have to go back to that there are different factions, I guess, within the military. And can you go back to your first one again?
The role of Al Jazeera and how it's changed reporting because of its on-the-ground expertise and familiarity, particularly with the air world.
Yeah. Well, I think you brought up a good point in that I think in some ways the military has stopped trying to squash Al Jazeera and started to find ways in which it can, you know, better use Al Jazeera. You know, I guess some of it is, it's a little bit hard for me. I was in Iraq during the invasion, so I miss some of what was, we were sort of in the middle of it, so I didn't hear all of what Al Jazeera was reporting initially. I only learned about it after the fact, after we sort of came home. My opinion is there's, you know, the same way that here in the US we have media outlets that take a certain position, you know, in the Arab world there's media outlets that take a certain position. But I think there's a difference between coming at a story with a certain bent versus just misinformation. And I think maybe that was some of the damage that Al Jazeera did initially, is that some of the facts that were being reported just weren't true. But I think just sort of jumping off that point with Al Jazeera, one of the conversations I had with a couple guys in Afghanistan was that when there was an incident where troops were killed, a helicopter went down, the military would do a full investigation, and they wouldn't really come out with a report until they had crossed all the T's, dotted all the I's, crossed all the T's, made sure everything was perfect, and then they come out with this report. But the problem was information was going so quickly that a report that came out 2-3 weeks after the incident, people just sort of shrugged their shoulders and said, oh, yeah, the Army made some comment about that incident 3 weeks ago that nobody remembers. And I think they've had to really adapt, not only in their like social media, their Facebook pages, their tweets, but even just getting information out. I think they've now come around to the idea of getting a limited story out early is better than waiting for the complete full picture and not having a voice out there, because the Taliban have PR people. You know, I can call up the Taliban public affairs person. You know, they're going to have a comment out there, and that comment will be out there quickly. And if you have silence on the other side while the military is waiting 3 weeks for this investigation to wrap up, that sits there, and by the time the investigation is done, you know, the narrative is already taken hold, I guess.
I'm going to take another question over here.
Okay. Hi. I was curious about how much freedom you have about the selection, the stories you want to pursue. And given that you might have favorite topics, is it difficult to maintain a sense of objectivity when you're following through on these stories?
For objectivity, I tend to try personally to, if I know my own personal opinion about a story, I'll almost try to go a little bit further the other way, just because unconsciously it may seep into my writing. If someone is pro-choice and they're writing a story about abortion, it's not a topic I cover, but if, say someone's pro-choice and they write a story about abortion, you've got to make sure that the pro-life viewpoint is represented in that story. And so if I have a personal feeling about something that I'm covering in the Pentagon, I'll almost try to overcompensate for that a little bit on the other side to make sure I'm weighting things properly. And then say, what was the first part of that question?
Freedom you have
Oh.
in the choice of topics.
We're required to pitch stories every day, and those can come from just reading blog sites. You get a lot of stuff just from military families blogging about different topics, problems on a base, issues they're worried about. Navy Times, Marine Corps Times, Army Times, we'll read through that. But we're required to pitch stories to our boss every day. He, in turn, will pitch to one of our shows, like Situation Room, Wolf Blitzer, things like that. We're free to pitch. Our stories don't always get accepted. So you're in some ways a salesman because you're competing with the White House correspondent, the congressional correspondent. Other people have other stories going on as well. So you not only have to have a good story, but you've got to be willing to sell it to get some traction and attention.
We have a young man right here, and then the gentleman above, and then we have time for
All
maybe
right.
one after that.
What is your opinion on the beginning of live war coverage, as in the Gulf War, when people could just watch it on their TV, and as opposed to the past where there was a lag time between when you got information on the war overseas?
I guess, in watching and talking to some of my older colleagues who were around, like for Vietnam and things like that, where, they would get these reels and it would take days and weeks to come out. And by that time, you had a real context of what you had seen, and you were able to shape that. We don't live in that world. And honestly, if I took 3 weeks to get a story out for CNN, I'd be fired pretty quickly. They want the information quickly. So, I think as I was telling John with that context of history, you do lose a little bit of perspective because you've got to make quick, fast choices. And the context of what you've just seen, this battle, it may look different in 3 weeks. What you thought was significant that day may turn out to be nothing. Whereas something that you didn't really highlight in that story turns out to be the big deal. There was an embed where we were in this convoy for hours and hours. It was all day, every day, and we got back to our home base or whatever in Kabul. And we're looking through a lot of the footage, and there was this one shot we had where one of the soldiers on top of the MRAP threw something at an Afghan who was like on a little bicycle, and it like hit the Afghan in the head and knocked him off the bike. And looking at it, we didn't know, was this soldier just pissed off, had a bad day, and just decided to take it out on this guy who's riding his bike? Or did the Afghan do something that we didn't see on video beforehand that provoked him? We didn't know. And we were already back in Kabul. I can't remember. You can't call up and say, hey, 5 days ago on this patrol, we couldn't even tell who it was. We didn't remember what vehicle we were in that day. And so we made the decision not to air it, just because we didn't have context, and to air it without being able to know who it was or what the situation was, it was a judgment call, and we just decided it's best at that time not to air it.
We have time for 2 more questions. This gentleman here and then the gentleman up there.
Yes. One of the most interesting reads I've had lately is The Wrong War by Bing West. Do you know Bing West? Have you read the book? And if so, can you give some perspective from your point of view? Thank you.
I have not. I do know of Bing West, but I have not read the book. Yeah, I'm sorry.
Up there.
Anyone successful in their craft has had good influences or excellent mentoring. I'd be curious, I'm sure we all would be, who influenced you and mentored you.
I went to Maryland, right down the road, and I had one professor who was very hard and wouldn't accept any shortcuts. So unlike a lot of classes where, if you were a little late, you get downgraded, you take a percentage off. If you were 5 minutes late handing in, a piece, an edited piece, he'd just fail. And it was harsh. I mean, when you're like 18 and you're used to like, well, can't just give me a C or, that's, but it really, his thing was, if you don't make deadline, you will be fired. You have to make deadline. And like what I thought was harsh then, it really helped me. Not that I've made deadline every time. I've screwed up before too. But it really drilled into me that you can have the most fascinating, amazing piece that's ever been written with the most beautiful visuals, but it's TV. So if it's not ready at 5:05 when you were supposed to be ready, it's no good. It's not writing a novel, it's TV. And I've also had, there's a guy at the Pentagon who I respect a lot, who's, I kind of go to him to get a sort of a reality check. I'd say we keep each other honest. Not in something that we use. I don't use it for information. It's more, hey, we brought that general in. What'd you think about him? And I can say, man, he was worthless. It was just the company line. It's a spiel. It was a waste of like that. He's not somebody you want to bring back. He didn't really offer anything. Or I can say, hey, I did this story, what'd you think? Did it hit the mark? And, and sometimes he'll say, you really missed this important point, and so it's good to have that sort of trust, where you can go to somebody and be very honest with each other. Yeah.
Okay. We have run out of time. I'm sure Chris wouldn't mind hanging out afterwards if you have any questions one-on-one. But I want to thank Christopher Lawrence for joining us here today. Round of applause for Christopher Lawrence. Thank you. And the museum would also like to thank Altria Group for making free admission possible for veterans and their families this weekend. Thank you for joining us here today, and enjoy the rest of your day at the museum. Thank you. Great job,
John.
Yeah, that was fun.
That was great.
Yeah.
Thank you.